Welcome back to Edelbrock Garage. Today we continue to strip the fairlane. Now that the power plant is removed, the next phase is removing the suspension components, pulling the gas tank, and removing the rear end. We had a reduced crew tonight, which is okay because we have just enough manpower so we aren't running over one another.
What?
We began the night grabbing a few wheelbase measurements. Once we decide on a chassis, these measurements will be needed to determine not only that the chassis will fit, but also to help figure out what wheel and tire size we might be able to stuff under this build. When we started removing the fairlane front suspension, we thought everything would go pretty smooth. We wrenched and got most of the easy stuff removed, like the wheels and tires, and started unbolting the tie rod ends from the steering knuckles. Quickly ran into a snag that only a 50-year-old Ford could have.
Great, now it's just spinning. There's a taper on the bottom of the joint, so now what's happening is just the nut's spinning a bit, so yeah, push the taper back.
After struggling with the spinning tie rod end and removing the front sway bar, it became apparent that 50 years of wear and tear and weathering might just make this teardown slightly more difficult.
Do you think we should just take these four off and drop the whole thing? We're not going to use this, yeah, I mean the new suspension won't. That's kind of what I was thinking. If we drop that, then it's just, you know, upper and lower control arm really, right? The question I'm thinking is how are we going to get the springs out?
The driver's side strut rod brace came off with no problem. But the passenger side was another animal.
There goes another one.
There goes that one.
There goes that one.
After breaking a few bolt heads off, we ended up using a bit of muscle and a 5-pound sledge to get the work done. With the front strut mounts now loose, we turned our attention to the rear suspension. Once we started to unbolt the leaf springs, we realized we needed to reposition the lift pads because we originally set them up on the leaf spring mounts. We used some body jacks and reset the lift arms, which enabled us to loosen the leaf springs and finish dropping the rear end with minimal hassle.
Keep going. Keep going. Go a little more. There you go. Yeah, I took some pressure on.
Look at Robert's like a professional. Yeah, dude.
With the rear end and leaf springs gone, team member Robert turned his attention to removing the gas tank at the back of the car. Meanwhile, the rest of the team focused on removing the rest of the front suspension. Because we're without a spring compressor, we decided that it might be a good idea to relieve some of the spring tension. Out came the gas axe. After heating the springs for a bit, it dawned on us that since we had no intention of reusing the original suspension components, the decision was made to speed up the process by cutting the springs out entirely.
Hey, cut her again right here.
Remember how deep that thing is in the pocket? that coil, it's just hitting up against what's left of the spring. This cut, it only takes a couple minutes, so let's just cut a full coil out of it.
That turned out to be easier said than done. And did it speed up the process? Not quite.
That had more pressure than the first one.
We cut, and cut again.
You should be able to get that right up.
We finally got the springs cut down to the point where we were able to remove a couple of sections, which enabled us to continue with removal. After fighting with the springs, we were finally able to remove the remaining lower bolts, lower the car, and unbolt the fasteners holding in the remaining suspension.
There we go.
Watch it, it's hot.
With the main suspension components removed, we weren't quite done. The steering box and power steering ram still needed to be removed.
These two bolts right here, Scott.
Right, these four actually.
Yeah.
These four hold the box on, but then we got to disconnect the...
It looks like it's just.
While Troy and Scott work to get the ram out, let's hear from project leader Scott Herman, who has an update on what the group decided regarding the chassis.
So we've had a lot of discussion on what to do to make this car handle now that we've got the suspension all taken apart. We could either do subframes or we could do a complete chassis. After considerable deliberation, we think that the best way to go and make it handle like a car today rather than a car from the 1960s is to get a full, complete chassis. So we contacted Art Morrison. They're going to take care of us and fabricate a complete chassis with late model equipment on it. Their late model suspension components will be great on this car and make it handle real well. So the first step is to take a bunch of basic dimensions, because we're going to modify it different than a standard dimension car, moving the motor back possibly. So we took some basic dimensions, handed it off to Art Morrison, and they'll go ahead and give us a drawing, and then we'll start to review that and see if there's going to be any
Well,
changes.
show that to my wife. My wedding ring's a little dirtier. Who wears gloves? What self-respecting man?
With the steering ram removed, the crew turned their attention to the front bumper, which, as it turns out, wasn't really cooperating. After 50 years, who can blame it?
It's almost like they're freaking metric or something.
Where's Rusty?
No, I can't even get it on the... It's slipping out.
There you go. You almost broke the. See it twisting that fucker around. Look at that. Grab it, Mike.
This should be off of there now. If we get this one done, that'll undo this bracket and that. We'll be able to slide the bumper off.
Yeah, but what's happened is it's a welded nut in this bracket, and now the nut came unloose after I
So
smoked it.
grab that with the
Plier.
maybe. Pull that bolt off. Stays.
Take it off the bumper on the outside. Right in there. It's like on the other side.
Oh, we still have this bracket up here still that's attached.
Sometimes you just need a fresh perspective on the situation, and Robert had just the solution. And after a little patience and elbow grease, we prevailed.
There it is.
With these parts gone, let's lower the car, pop the trunk, and finish removing the rear shocks.
Take a nap. What's happening?
Ready?
I swear, when I get out of here.
This is how the ride height should be right here.
I was going to say, it's kind of sitting exactly how it should sit.
Well, that about does it for this episode of Edelbrock Garage. Thanks for watching. Catch the latest on the Fairlane build by visiting the Edelblog and following us on social media.